I met Beverley Allitt on my third day working at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital. I was still figuring out how to operate the medication trolley without looking like a complete idiot, still getting used to the starchy stiffness of the uniforms, still learning how to make small talk with patients whose names I could barely remember. I was new, fresh out of training, nervous as hell, and trying not to let it show. Beverley, though, she wasn't like me. She carried herself with this calm assurance, like she'd been born in a hospital corridor. Had that kind of voice that was always just above a whisper, soft and gentle, like it had been designed for hospice work. She spoke slowly, as if every word was carefully chosen to calm someone down. I think that's why I liked her the first time we crossed paths properly was in the break room. I was sitting alone, drinking lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug that had "Best Mom Ever" written on the side, clearly not mine. I had no appetite. We'd just lost a patient. He was old, yes, and frail, but he had been laughing earlier that morning. Death still felt like a betrayal. I wasn't used to it yet. She walked in, sat beside me without asking, passed me a chocolate bar. "You look like you've had a rough shift," she said, smiling softly. I nodded. "Rougher than I expected. That one this morning." She asked, "Mr. Kellerman?" "Yeah?" She unwrapped a granola bar of her own. "It never gets easier, but you learn how to carry it differently." It felt good to hear that from someone who seemed like she had it all figured out. I assumed she was just one of those people who was born to take care of others. She was always around, always checking. And if a patient so much as groaned in discomfort, Beverley was already by their side, fluffing pillows, adjusting IVs, writing down notes. She was thorough, overly thorough, but no one questioned it. The others liked her too. The senior nurses let her take charge of things that were way above her pay grade. Doctors would actually listen when she spoke. Patients trusted her immediately. I'd hear them say things like, "If Beverly's here, I know I'm in good hands." You have to understand, that kind of admiration doesn't come easy in a place like that. Hospitals are full of tired people, overworked and underpaid, too drained to care what anyone else is doing. But Beverley stood out, not because she was loud or flashy, but because she always seemed to be exactly where she was needed. I started working more night shifts around that time. That's when I noticed how often she was on the same schedule, not assigned, just there. She'd stay late, even when she wasn't on the clock, said she didn't mind helping out if we were short-staffed. No one argued. If anything, it was a relief. You could breathe easier knowing Beverley was around. But then there was Mrs. Hargreaves. She was 92, a little thing with cloudy eyes and a voice like sandpaper. She reminded me of my own Nan, honestly, sharp-witted despite the slow decay of her body. She wasn't supposed to go just yet. Her vitals were steady, and she'd even eaten a full breakfast the day before. But she passed quietly during a late shift, just after midnight. I remember because I was restocking bandages in the supply room when the code came through the intercom. By the time I got there, the monitors were flatlined. Beverley was all ready, with her checking her pulse, calling it in. The room was eerily calm. There were no signs of distress, no thrashing, no alarms, just stillness. She went peacefully, Beverley said. Her voice barely audible. We all believed her. The doctors ruled it a natural death. At her age, that's usually how these things go. There wasn't even a post-mortem, no autopsy. Her family didn't ask for one. Why would they? She'd been old, tired, ready, but something about it sat wrong with me. I couldn't shake it. Maybe it was the way Beverley had looked, too composed, not a hair out of place. She didn't even seem surprised, just prepared, like she'd known it was coming, like she'd been waiting. Of course, I told myself I was being paranoid. Grief does strange things to people, even when it's not your own. Maybe I just didn't like losing patients. Maybe I was jealous of how well Beverley seemed to cope. Still, it lingered. The day after Mrs. Hargreaves died, I found Beverley sitting beside another elderly patient, brushing her hair back and humming quietly. That same soft hum I had heard before, a lullaby with no words. I watched her from the hallway for a moment. It was almost beautiful, gentle, tender, but it also sent a strange chill through me, like watching a spider carefully wrapping its prey. I pushed the thought away, 'cause who would think something like that about a nurse, about someone who brought extra blankets for cold patients and stayed past midnight just to hold hands with the dying? But I would come to learn something that changed everything. Beverley didn't do those things out of kindness. She did them out of control, and was still too green to see it, at least not yet. Mrs. Hargreaves' death was officially ruled as natural, but I still remember every detail about that night because something inside me knew, even then, that nothing about it was normal. You have to understand that Grantham and Kesteven Hospital, we dealt with death often, especially in the geriatric ward. Elderly patients passed in their sleep, suffered strokes, faded after surgeries, or simply slipped away quietly without much warning. It wasn't rare, and it wasn't always traumatic. But the case of Evelyn Hargreaves still echoes in my memory with an odd sharpness. Like a song you hear only once but can never forget. She was 92, with thinning white hair pulled into a loose bun, and a voice so gravelly you could mistake it for a smoker's, though she hadn't touched a cigarette in 20 years. Her mind was clearer than her body allowed, and she would still tell jokes to the nurses, especially the younger ones like me. "You've got kind eyes," she said to me once, holding my wrist gently as I adjusted her pillow. "Don't let this place take that from you." I didn't understand what she meant then. Maybe she just saw the exhaustion on my face. But I've thought about those words 100 times since. The night she died, the hospital was quiet in that eerie way. Only hospitals can be everything still and humming at the same time. Machines blinking softly, dim emergency lights casting long shadows on the walls. I remember walking down the corridor to the break room just before midnight to grab a cup of coffee, only to hear Beverley's voice crackle over the intercom. "Room 14, we've got a problem," she said, calm but urgent. That was Mrs. Hargreaves' room. I dropped the mug, didn't even notice the shatter, and ran down the hall. When I arrived, Beverley was already standing beside the bed, one hand on Evelyn's wrist, the other gently pulling a sheet over her face. "She's gone," she whispered, almost reverently. She just stopped. I remember staring at the heart monitor. It was flatlined. No alarms had sounded. Distress. No warning. Just gone. One moment Evelyn had been breathing, in the next, silence. And Beverley, of course, had been the only one with her. I looked at her hands, thinking maybe she'd tried to resuscitate her. Maybe she'd administered something. Maybe something. But they were clean, calm, folded in front of her like she was praying. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac failure due to age-related complications. No autopsy was performed. Her family didn't push for one. They trusted us. Why wouldn't they? She was 92, after all. People that old don't need a dramatic reason to pass on. They're allowed to simply fade. And that's what everyone told themselves had happened. Everyone but me. That night, I stayed behind after my shift. I couldn't sleep, and the idea of going home felt wrong. I sat in the nurse's station, staring at her empty chart. Everything about Evelyn's condition had been stable. Blood pressure, manageable. Heart rate, low but steady. No signs of infection. No recent medication changes. No complications. She'd even joked with me earlier that day, asking if I could sneak her a biscuit with her tea. It didn't make sense. I thought about asking Beverley more about what happened, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she'd stood there, so composed, as if she'd been waiting for Evelyn to die. Or maybe it was the way she hadn't called for help until it was already too late. I didn't have proof, just a feeling. Sometimes that's enough to start seeing the cracks. The next morning, Beverly brought in muffins for the staff. "To take the edge off," she said with a small smile. She handed me one, blueberry, and patted my arm. "It's hard, I know. First death always hits different." I nodded. I didn't eat the muffin, okay? I left it on the counter and watched her for the rest of the day. I noticed she was still smiling, still humming under her breath, still doing that thing where she tucked her hair behind her ear when she spoke to patients. But something about it all felt staged now, like a performance she'd rehearsed to perfection. That afternoon, she asked to be assigned to more overnight shifts, said she was sleeping poorly anyway and preferred to be busy. The head nurse agreed, relieved to have someone so dependable during the graveyard hours. No one questioned her eagerness, but I started to, because death has a rhythm. In most hospitals, it comes in waves. Sometimes you don't lose a single patient for weeks, and then suddenly 3 are gone in a day. It ebbs and flows, and you learn to brace for those tides. But after Mrs. Hargreaves died, something changed. The rhythm stopped feeling natural. It started feeling orchestrated. Within 2 weeks, we lost 3 more elderly patients. All of them were under Beverly's care. All of them passed during the night. All of them were alone in their rooms. Again, no alarms, no warnings, just gone. Their names were Mrs. Jennings, Mr. Bailey, and Mr. Collins. Each time, Beverly was the one who discovered the body. Time, she called it in without panic. Each time, she spoke to the families, offered her condolences, said things like she was at peace or he didn't suffer. And each time, I watched her a little more closely. There was no proof, of course, just timing, coincidence, unlucky clusters of death. Happens. That's what the doctors said. That's what the charts showed, okay? No signs of trauma, no suspicious medications, just age, frailty, time. But deep down, I started to believe something else. I started to believe that Beverly wasn't just present when these people died. She was involved, not just involved, responsible. The realization came slow, like fog creeping under a door. I'd replay conversations with her in my head. I'd think back to the way she touched Mrs. Hargreaves' wrist, how cold her eyes looked, despite the soft words she always used. She never cried, not really, not even when the families did. She'd squeeze their shoulders and tilt her head, but her face stayed still, serene, controlled. At first, I thought maybe she was just good at compartmentalizing. Some people are, but that's not what it was. Beverly didn't carry grief. She carried something else, a kind of pride, tide, and the more I saw it, the more I couldn't ignore it. But what could I do? Accuse her of what? Exactly. Being too calm. Being on shift too often. The truth was, I had no idea what I was dealing with. I didn't know if I was just paranoid, or if something evil was actually happening right under our noses. So I did nothing. I watched, I waited, and I told myself I was imagining things. But then I found her diary, and everything changed. I thought I knew about Beverley Allitt collapsed in an instant, because it wasn't just that she was present when people died. It was that she kept track, that she was counting. And Mrs. Hargreaves, she was number 1. There's a strange phenomenon that happens when you work long enough in a hospital. You start to develop a kind of sixth sense. It's not supernatural. It's just pattern recognition, dressed up as intuition. You get used to the sounds. Hum of the fluorescent lights, the steady beep of vitals, the distant squeak of gurney wheels on polished floors. And you get used to the rhythms of life and death. You start to notice the subtle things before they become emergencies, okay? The way a patient's voice changes a day before their lungs give out. It's a slight graying of skin when the kidneys are beginning to fail. The way nurses and doctors grow quiet during certain shifts, when everyone feels the same invisible pressure in the air. That sixth sense was what told me something was wrong long before I could prove it. It started as a whisper in my head that said, "Pay attention." And so I did. After Mrs. Hargreaves passed, the ward felt different. At first, I told myself it was just grief. She'd been a familiar face, and even if her death had been expected, it still shook us. But then, more patients started dying, quietly, at night, one after the other. I tried to ignore it at first, tried to focus on my work, but something didn't sit right. Each time I walked into the ward, it felt colder. Not physically, I mean emotionally. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones when you realize something evil might be happening just out of sight. Right where everyone else is pretending everything's fine. It was the third or fourth death that really made me stop pretending. An elderly man named Mr. Collins, late 80s, recovering from a minor infection. He was improving, eating, talking, smiling, even. He'd told me about his granddaughter the day before he died, how she was the first in the family to go to university. He'd been proud. He had plans to go home the following week. And then, just like that, he was gone. Night shift, Beverley was on duty. She was the one who found him. "They always go when they're ready," she said softly, placing a fresh rose on the table beside his empty bed the next morning. No one questioned her. Why would they? She was the caring nurse, the one who stayed past her hours, the one who knew how to hold a grieving daughter's hand and whisper just the right things to keep them from falling apart. But I noticed the timing. I noticed the same pattern over and over. And I started writing it down. I bought a small notebook, the kind that fits in your scrub pocket. On the front, I wrote patient notes, just in case anyone saw it. But inside, it was something else entirely. I wasn't logging medical details. I was tracking deaths, names, dates, time of death, nurse on duty. I made a chart, T'd, and the more I wrote, the more horrifying the pattern became. All of a sudden, deaths in the ward, most of them, happened during overnight shifts. And more than 80% had one thing in common: Beverley Allitt. I didn't want to believe it at first. You don't want to believe that someone you've worked beside, laughed with, trusted with vulnerable lives could be capable of something like that. It goes against everything we're taught as nurses. We take oaths. We commit ourselves to helping people heal, not to harm. So I told myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe she just got the tough cases. Maybe she was volunteering for shifts where she knew death was more likely to make sure no one died alone. Maybe she had good intentions. But no matter how I twisted the data, the pattern didn't lie. Beverley wasn't just present during these deaths. She was orbiting them. It's like a storm that showed up just before everything went quiet. I started paying closer attention to how she moved through the ward. During night shifts, when everything was still and the halls were dark, she always found excuses to linger near room 7 or room 12 or whatever room had the most fragile patient inside. She'd offer to help tuck them in, to administer pain meds, to adjust the oxygen. At first, these things looked like kindness. But after a while, they started looking like rituals. It's like steps in a process only she understood. And then there was the humming. Beverley had this habit. She would hum softly as she walked from room to room. A simple melody. No words, just this lilting, hypnotic tune that followed her like a shadow. I didn't think much of it at first. Lots of nurses hum. But when I started to track her behavior, I realized something that turned my blood cold. Every time she was humming during a shift, someone died. I went back through my notes, checked it against the shift schedules. I was right. Nights she was quiet. Nothing happened. But the nights she was humming, that's when someone flatlined. It was like a song she sang to herself, a death lullaby. There were other strange details too. I noticed she always volunteered to flush 4 lines at night, even if she wasn't assigned to that patient. She'd say something like, "They looked a bit dry," or "Their hands felt cold, just topping them up." But after she left, the patient would look drowsier than usual, slower to respond. I started quietly checking their charts, noting every dosage, every medication, every change. Nothing ever looked wrong on paper, but something was wrong. I just couldn't prove it yet. One night, I followed her. It was just before 2 a.m. The ward was dim, most patients asleep. I kept the lights low and stayed by the nurse's station, pretending to fill out reports. I watched as Beverley walked past room at Mr. Bailey's room. He'd been struggling with his breathing the night before, but he was stable. She paused at the doorway, looked inside, then walked on. 2 minutes later, she came back. No meds in hand, no clipboard, just humming. She slipped inside without turning on the light. I waited 60 seconds, then 90, then stood up. I wasn't thinking. Clearly, I just felt this terrible pressure in my chest, like something bad was about to happen. I walked quietly down the hall, stopping just outside his door. It was cracked open an inch. I looked in. Beverley was standing beside Mr. Bailey's bed, one hand on his the fourth, the other brushing his forehead like a mother with a sick child. Her lips moved softly, still humming. Eyes were half open, but unfocused. I couldn't see what she was doing with the 4, but her other hand moved quickly, like she was injecting something into the port. I panicked, didn't know what to do. If I rushed in, what would I say? What if I was wrong? What if I was seeing something completely innocent? But something inside me, something ancient and loud, was screaming, "Do something." So I stepped in. "Oh," said, pretending to be surprised. "I was just coming to check his stats." Beverley turned, her face smooth as marble. Not startled, not flustered, just still. "Everything's fine," she said. "Huh?" He seemed restless. I was just helping him settle. She walked past me slowly, her perfume faint but distinct, floral, powdery. She didn't look back. I stood there for a minute, staring at Mr. Bailey. His breathing was shallow. I checked the 4-port. No residue, nothing in the line. I checked the med drawer. Everything was locked. I had no proof. It's the weight in my gut telling me I had just witnessed something terrible, and that if I didn't act soon, someone else would die the next morning. Mr. Bailey was found dead. Beverley was the one who discovered him. The report said cardiac arrest due to complications from pneumonia, but I knew better. The problem was, no one else believed me. I tried talking to one of the senior nurses, a woman named Margaret, who had been there over a decade. I told her what I saw, what I suspected. She gave me a long look, then sighed. "You know what you're suggesting, right?" she said. "That one of our own is what? A murderer." "I don't know what she is," I whispered, "but she's dangerous." She shook her head. "Be careful, love. If you start throwing accusations like that around here, and you'll be the one they escort out the door." I walked away from that conversation, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life, because now I wasn't just working beside a potential killer. I was doing it in silence. I doubled down on my notes, started copying patient logs. I watched med cabinets during every shift. I took photos of charts when no one was looking. I studied the rotation schedules, looked for holes, gaps, coincidences that weren't coincidences at all. I became obsessed, but nothing I found was enough. Beverley was too careful, too subtle. She never left a mess. And even when she did, the hospital cleaned it up for her without even realizing. And then, one night, while changing sheets in the break room, I found something that changed everything. Tucked beneath the cushion of the staff sofa, half buried in dust and cookie crumbs, was a small, leather-bound notebook. At first, I assumed someone had forgotten it. Maybe someone's shift journal. I flipped it open. Inside were rows and rows of handwritten names. No context, just names. H1, followed by a date and a tally mark. There were pages of them, and at the very top, written in looping, feminine cursive, was the name, Beverley Allitt. I slammed the book shut, heart pounding so loudly I thought I might faint, because there it was, proof, not official, not medical, but chilling. She wasn't just killing them, she was counting. They say devotion is a virtue in nursing, and for most people, it is. It's what keeps us going when the shifts stretch into 14 hours and your legs feel like they've been replaced with concrete. It's what pushes you to smile at the 6th patient who's yelled at you that day. What helps you hold someone's hand when they're dying and there's no family around to say goodbye? Most of us don't get into this line of work for money or recognition. We do it because we want to help, because we care. But Beverley Allitt's devotion wasn't like ours. It wasn't warm. It wasn't human. It was hollow and obsessive, like a parasite pretending to be empathy. And I didn't understand just how deep her obsession ran until I started watching her through different eyes, not as a coworker, but as a threat. The notebook I found in the staff lounge, her little black diary filled with names and tally marks, never left my mind after that night. I didn't dare take it, didn't even photograph the pages. I knew that if it went missing, she would know who had touched it, and I wasn't ready for that. So, instead, I memorized what I could, names I recognized from the ward, patients I'd helped care for, and all those dates that aligned far too perfectly with the silent deaths we chalked up to old age. And always, always, the single tally mark beside each name. One mark, one death. I didn't know why she wrote them down. Maybe it was a way to remember, or maybe it was her twisted form of a trophy case. But what chilled me the most wasn't the list itself. It was how she'd hidden it in plain sight, in the staff lounge where we all laughed and gossiped and talked about weekend plans. She wasn't hiding anymore. She didn't think she had to. After that night, I started observing her like I was gathering evidence, even though I had no idea who would listen if I brought it forward. She still acted the same in public, soft-spoken, helpful, always the first to volunteer for the hard cases. But now that I was paying attention, I could see how calculated it was. C was always first to the medication cart, always offering to help other nurses with their rounds, especially if the patient was unwell. She positioned herself near vulnerable patients, like a moth circling a flame. I watched her in the medicine room one night as she checked the narcotics cabinet. She stared at the lockbox for just a moment too long, as if weighing something. Then she turned to me and smiled like she hadn't just been standing still with her hand on the morphine drawer for 10 full seconds. "You doing okay?" She asked me in that same quiet voice, the one that sounded like a lullaby dipped in honey. "Yeah," I said, "just tired." She nodded. The nights get to you after a while. I used to sleep so well before I started working them. I remember thinking, so why do you keep choosing them? But I didn't ask, not yet. It was around this time that Beverley began inserting herself into nearly every part of the wards. Routine. She wasn't just doing her job, she was doing everyone else's, too. If a patient needed a dose administered at 3 a.m., Beverley had already done it. If someone needed a new saline bag, she was the one switching it out, often without logging the change in the chart. She said it was because she didn't want to bother the rest of us, that she was just trying to help. But the thing about hospitals is that every little action leaves a trace of you're doing it right. Every med given, every note taken, every syringe used, but Beverley had a habit of erasing her tracks. Things would be missing from the cabinet, but not logged. Files gone, syringes unaccounted for. If I asked her about it, she'd smile like I had told a joke. "You're just tired," she'd say. "Happens to all of us." I probably misfiled it, but I knew better when I started comparing patient logs with the death dates in her diary. I noticed something even more disturbing, she always forgot to document meds on the nights someone died. It was like clockwork. Still, no one else noticed. Or if they did, they didn't speak up. And I began to wonder how far her influence stretched. She had the trust of the entire ward. The doctors leaned on her opinions. The senior nurses let her run things unofficially. She was the one families asked for by name. It was like she'd built this identity that couldn't be questioned, a reputation so spotless that no one even considered looking underneath it. And that's when it hit me. Beverley didn't just want to kill. She wanted to be worshipped while she did it. Every part of her behavior started to make sense when seen through that lens. She wasn't just seeking control. She was building a world where she could play God. She gave comfort with one hand and death with the other, and no one realized the duality until it was too late. Her devotion wasn't to her patients. Sid was to the performance. And it was working. One particular shift, I remember a patient named Mr. Leary. He was a former school teacher, sweet and sharp, despite being confined to a wheelchair. He'd been admitted for a routine infection, but had developed complications. Nothing life-threatening, but he needed observation. I liked him. We'd talk about literature during rounds. He told me once that he believed words could be more dangerous than weapons. I remember writing that down in my notebook, not the secret one tracking Beverley, but my real one. It felt like a warning I didn't yet understand. That night, I came in early to check on him before my shift began. His vitals were steady. He was eating pudding and watching a nature show on the small wall-mounted TV. Beverley wasn't even on shift yet. I felt relieved. By 2:30 a.m., he was dead. The report said cardiac arrhythmia. I checked the log. Beverley had clocked in just after midnight to cover for a sick coworker. No one remembered her being called in, but no one questioned it either. Why would they? She was just being helpful. Again. And just like that, Mr. Leary's name ended up in my secret notebook with the same pattern as all the others. The stable gives, Beverley appears, gives sudden death. I remember sitting in the supply closet that night, lights off, gripping the edges of the shelving until my knuckles went white. I wanted to scream, wanted to walk out, find the nearest police officer, throw my hands in the air and say, "There's a killer in the hospital and no one sees her because she's wearing a damn uniform." But I didn't, because I still had no real proof, just a notebook, patterns, just a nightmare that was starting to look like reality. I started keeping copies of the medication logs, photocopying shift rosters, downloading digital records when no one was looking. I even installed a cheap pocket recorder and kept it in my scrubs during night shifts. I didn't know what I was looking for anymore. A confession, a slip-up, some moment where Beverley's mask cracked and the monster underneath peeked out. But nothing ever came. She was always calm, always precise, and always just far enough outside the perimeter of blame. It was maddening then. One night, something happened that nearly broke me. It was a Saturday, quiet, the kind of shift where time feels thick, like you're wading through molasses. I was assigned to room 6, Mrs. Fryer. She was in for post-op recovery after a hip replacement, doing well, talking, stable. I left her for a moment to help with a call in room 9. When I came back, Beverley was in her room, sitting beside her, smiling. I froze. My body reacted before my brain did. I walked in, pretending like I hadn't seen her there. "Need help with anything?" I asked. Beverley looked up slowly, as if startled. "Just saying hi." She said she was in pain. So, I offered to sit for a moment. She stood, smoothed her uniform, and walked past me without waiting for a reply. I checked Mrs. Fryer's chart. No pain meds recorded. I checked the 4. Something was off. The line had a faint shimmer near the portochemical residue. I don't know how I knew it, but I did. Something had been added. I called the attending, had blood drawn, requested a talk screen under the guise of unusual post-op behavior. I told myself this would be it. This would be the moment I proved she was doing it. But the labs came back clean. Nothing, no foreign substances, no traces. Nothing that would raise suspicion. And 2 nights later, Mrs. Fryer was gone. Just gone. Natural causes, the report said. I felt like I was losing my mind. And through all of it, Beverley kept smiling, kept humming, kept touching patients with that same practiced gentleness. I started to think she was untouchable, that she'd already won, and maybe she had. Because in a hospital full of pain and dying people, what's one more death? What's one more statistic in a sea of grief? But I wasn't giving up. I couldn't, because now it wasn't just suspicion. It was personal. I'd seen too many people go, too many eyes closed forever, while Beverley stood inches away. I didn't know what she wanted or why she was doing it, but I knew this. She wasn't going to stop, not unless someone made her. Not unless someone dragged the truth out from under all her fake compassion and smiled lies. She was too devoted to the game, too addicted to the role. And every time she looked at a patient, she wasn't seeing a person, was seeing a number, a future tally, a name to be added to her list. So I made a decision. If I couldn't stop her with proof, I would stop her with exposure. And that's when I began planning the one thing she never saw coming, a trap. I thought it would only be the elderly. That may be. Whatever was wrong with Beverley Allitt, whatever sickness had burrowed into her soul, was limited to those who were already near the end. That was something I could almost understand. Not forgive, not excuse, but comprehend. There's a kind of cold logic in targeting the old people who are expected to die soon anyway. I told myself that maybe she saw it as mercy in her twisted way. Maybe she thought she was helping. But then came the girl in bed 9, and any illusion I had about Beverley's motives was torn to pieces. Her name was Katie, just 6 years old, with freckles on her cheeks and a laugh that rang through the children's ward like wind chimes in the spring. She had been admitted for a mild respiratory infection, something treatable, something that should have been routine. Her parents were always by her side during the day, reading her stories, brushing her hair, bringing her coloring books and stuffed animals. Katie wasn't afraid of hospitals. She thought of us as her grown-up helpers, and she liked Beverley a lot. Beverley was one of the few nurses who didn't talk down to her. She'd braid Katie's hair and let her wear her stethoscope. "You're my assistant today," she'd say with a wink. Katie loved that. So when the nights came and visiting hours ended, Katie didn't cry when her parents had to leave. She felt safe. She trusted us. And Beverley made sure she trusted her most of all. I remembered the evening before it happened. I was finishing a late shift and passing by the pediatric ward on my way out. The lights were dimmed, and most of the children were already asleep. I paused by Katie's room for a second. The door was cracked, just enough to see inside. Beverley was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand. She was humming softly some lullaby I didn't recognize, and Katie's eyes were half-lidded. The kind of peaceful drowsiness that only kids seem to find after a long day. I should have moved on, but I lingered. Something about the stillness in the room unnerved me. It was too quiet, too perfect. I watched Beverley lean in and tuck Katie's blanket under her chin. Then she said something. I couldn't hear it from where I stood, but Katie smiled and nodded. I forced myself to walk away. I don't know why I felt so uneasy. Maybe because I'd seen that same softness on Beverley's face before on nights when patients didn't wake up. Maybe because deep down I knew something was coming. I just didn't want to believe it would be a child. The next morning, I was called in early. We had an incident, one of the senior nurses told me, in pediatrics. My heart sank. Before she even said the name, I knew. Katie had gone into cardiac arrest sometime after 2 a.m. No history of heart issues. No irregular vitals leading up to it. She'd been cheerful the previous afternoon, eating her jelly and drawing flowers on her dinner tray. According to Beverley, she'd woken up crying, clutching her chest, and then just stopped breathing. The emergency CPR was performed. The pediatric crash team worked on her for nearly 20 minutes, and miraculously somehow Katie survived. But she wasn't the same. The doctor said she had suffered brain damage from the lack of oxygen. But when I saw her again, she didn't smile. Her eyes were wide and glassy, unfocused. She didn't recognize me. She didn't speak. Her parents were devastated, sitting on either side of her bed like statues, holding her limp hands and staring at the machines that now kept her alive. I stood just outside the doorway and felt bile rise in my throat, 'cause I knew Beverley had been in that room, and I knew she had done something. But no one wanted to ask the hard questions. Not yet. They called it a complication, an unexpected episode. I asked one of the junior doctors about it in the hallway later. He shrugged. "These things happen," he said. "Kids are more fragile than you think." But that wasn't true. Not like this. Not when all the signs were missing. I remembered. The flat lines from before. The silence. The eerie calm that always surrounded Beverley. It was all happening again, but now 2 children. That night, I didn't go home. Sat in the parking lot for an hour, staring at the ward windows. I couldn't go inside. I couldn't sleep either. So I drove aimlessly through town, my hands shaking on the wheel, every turn tighter than the last. I kept seeing Katie's face, how bright it used to be, how empty it was now. And I kept hearing Beverly's voice in my head, saying things like she's just tired, or she didn't suffer. Over and over again. Something was deeply wrong, and I was the only one who saw it. Or maybe I wasn't. The next morning, a colleague from pediatrics approached me, soft-spoken nurse named Julie. She was pale, like she hadn't slept in days. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. We went into the stairwell where no one could overhear us. She leaned against a cold wall and whispered, "I don't know what's going on, but ever since Beverly started these shifts, something feels off. You've noticed it too, haven't you?" I nodded, and that's when she told me. A week earlier, Julie had walked in on Beverly in the med room, standing perfectly still in front of an open cabinet. In her hand was a syringe filled with something, milky white. She didn't react when Julie entered, just turned slowly and smiled. "Just prepping early," she'd said. But the cabinet she was standing in front of only held controlled substances. Things you didn't just prep without authorization. Julie hadn't reported it. She felt frozen at the time, unsure of what she'd really seen. But now, after Katie, she couldn't stop thinking about it. I felt a surge of cold rush down my spine. We weren't imagining it. Something was happening, and if we didn't act, more patients, more children could be next. But who would believe us? Beverly was still seen as a golden nurse. She was careful. She was charming. She knew how to talk to superiors, how to deflect. We needed proof, real proof. So we started watching her. Quietly, we noted when she volunteered for certain shifts. We tracked which patients were assigned to her. We paid attention to medication logs, to equipment checks, to anything that might seem off. It didn't take long. Within days, a pattern emerged. Insulin levels that didn't match prescriptions. Injection sites not listed in charts. Missing ampules, always during her shifts. Always near the patients who later declined. We collected everything we could. But the moment that truly sealed it for me, the moment I knew, without a doubt, that Beverley Allitt was a predator came one night just before dawn. I had stayed behind, pretending to review files. I wanted to keep eyes on her. She didn't know I was still there. Around 4 a.m., I saw her slip into a child's room. A boy named Liam who was recovering from a mild asthma attack. No need for injections, no complications. Waited 5 minutes. Then I followed. The lights were dim. Liam was asleep. Beverly was standing over him, syringe in hand. I froze in the doorway. She looked up. Our eyes met. For one terrifying second. Neither of us spoke. Then she smiled. He was wheezing, she said, as calm as ever. Just giving him something to help breathe easier. I didn't move. I didn't nod. I just stood there, heart pounding so loud I thought it would echo off the walls. She placed the syringe back into the tray and walked past me. No guilt, no panic, just a cold, measured walk, as if she'd just finished refilling a water jug. That was the moment I knew we weren't dealing with a careless nurse or even a disturbed one. Beverley Allitt was methodical. She was calculating. And worst of all, she was just getting started. Katie had been her first child victim, but not her last. And unless someone stopped her, she was going to keep going. The question now was, how do you stop a killer when she wears the same uniform you do? I've replayed that night in my head more times than I can count. The moment I saw Beverley Allitt standing over that little boy, the syringe in her hand glinting under the dim ward lights like the blade of a knife. It wasn't just the act itself that haunts me. It was her eyes. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She didn't even try to hide what she was doing. She just looked at me like I was interrupting her, like I was the problem. That look did something to me. It stripped away whatever traces of doubt I had left. And once you see evil that clearly once, you realize it's standing in your hospital, wearing your uniform, walking the same halls. Where families come to heal, you can't pretend anymore. You can't stay quiet. But speaking up wasn't as easy as walking into an office and reporting her. This was 1991. There were no hospital-wide digital logs, no camera footage, no fingerprint, access to drug cabinets. It was all pen and paper, trust, and routine. And Beverly knew how to exploit that. She'd worked out how to make her killings look like medical anomalies, like sudden onset infections, like unfortunate complications. The others had explanations, every collapse, every failed resuscitation attempt. Except we were starting to realize those explanations always led back to her. So I did something that scared me. I broke the rules, started copying medical charts, quietly, carefully. I'd sneak into records after hours, take photos, jot down discrepancies, dosage mismatches, signs of overmedication. Julie helped too. We didn't tell anyone else at first. The fewer who knew, the safer it felt. Beverly was still liked, still trusted, and we didn't know how far her influence went. What if someone tipped her off? What if she got suspicious? All it would take was one accusation from her, one false claim of insubordination or harassment, and our careers would be over. But even that wasn't what kept me up at night. What terrified me was the idea that if she found out we were watching her, she'd escalate, that someone else would pay the price. And then someone did. His name was Paul, 7 years old. He had epilepsy and had come in for routine monitoring after a minor seizure. His prognosis was good. He was stable, funny, sharp as a tack. I had taken a liking to him. He told me he wanted to be a firefighter, said he liked to sound the boots made on the floor when they ran. I remember helping him with a puzzle the day before it happened. He was so proud when he finished it. I still remember his smile. It was the last time I saw it. That night, Beverly was on duty, and that morning, Paul was found unresponsive, small body slumped over the bed rail like a marionette whose strings had been cut. No sign of seizure, no trauma, no warning. PR was attempted. He was revived, barely, but like Katie before him, he wasn't the same. Brain damage, again. The doctor said it must have been sudden, maybe a rare neurological shutdown, a freak event. But Julie and I knew better. We knew the signs now. We'd seen them before. I remember sitting in the break room the next day, staring at a cup of cold tea, my hands trembling. Julie sat across from me, her face pale and drawn. "It's getting worse," she whispered. I nodded. "She's getting bolder," 'cause that's what it was. Beverly wasn't hiding anymore. She was selecting her victims, getting closer to them, watching them. She liked the trust. She liked building that connection because it made the betrayal more complete. That was part of her ritual. We began to see it clearer and clearer. First came the charm braiding hair, playing games, offering treats. Then came the night shift. Then came the silence. And after that, another child who never came home the same. It was a pattern, and we weren't the only ones beginning to see it. There were murmurs among the other staff, quiet conversations. In stairwells, brief exchanges near the nurse's station. "Didn't she treat that one, too? Weren't they fine just yesterday?" People were beginning to notice, but no one wanted to say it out loud. No one wanted to be the one to accuse a nurse of hurting children. It felt impossible, unthinkable. That's the trick of it, isn't it? When evil wears a kind face, when it offers you tea, laughs at your jokes, brings in homemade cookies for the break room, you don't want to believe it could also inject poison into a sleeping child's IV. But that's exactly what was happening, and it wasn't going to stop. After Paul, we knew we had to take it further. We took everything we had, our logs, our notes, our suspicions. I'd approached the doctor we trusted, Dr. Matthews. He was senior staff, respected, level-headed. We didn't know how he'd react. For all we knew, he'd laugh us out of the office, but we didn't have a choice anymore. It was a Friday afternoon. Julie and I sat down across from him and laid it all out. Every pattern, every shift, every child, every mysterious collapse. To his credit, Dr. Matthews didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He just listened. And when we were finished, he said 5 words that changed everything. "Leave this with me now." I remember walking out of that office in silence, unsure if we'd done the right thing. If Beverly found out, would she come after us? She hurt another child to distract from suspicion. We didn't sleep that weekend, but something was finally moving. Quietly, the hospital began to audit. Med logs were checked, shift rotations reviewed, called. A second opinion was brought in from an outside consultant. They didn't tell Beverly at first. They let her keep working while they watched. And then 2 days later, another child went into respiratory arrest. His name was Bradley. He had a fractured arm and was admitted for overnight observation. He should have been perfectly safe. Instead, his heart stopped at 3:12 a.m. Beverly was the last one who'd entered the room. This time, someone noticed. An empty vial on her potassium chloride, unaccounted for. The doctors confronted her. She said it had been a mistake, a misfile, but the pharmacy log didn't show any scheduled use. The consultant flagged it. The incident was escalated. And just like that, Beverly was quietly suspended, pending investigation. No charges yet. No arrest. Just removed. Temporarily, they told the families it was procedural. But we knew what they were starting to uncover there. And even as relief set in, there was a new fear had we caught her too late. When they searched Beverly's flat, they found something that shook me to my core. In a small drawer beside her bed, hidden beneath socks and spare batteries, were notebooks, dozens of them. Diaries, pages filled with childlike handwriting, and doodles of 4 bags, needles, and hospital beds. But what chilled the investigators wasn't the drawings. It was the numbers. She kept account. She'd written their names, first names only, with smiley faces beside some and X's beside others. Katie, Paul, Bradley. The names lined up with our records. K, And beside each name, she had written things like stopped breathing, came back, went quiet, mine, as if it were a game, as if she were keeping score. Okay. She wasn't just hurting them, she was cataloging them, reliving the power. Okay. She'd even drawn little clocks beside the names. Times of death, times of injection. Notes like before the meds kicked in or quiet nobody heard. It was all there, in her own words, her own handwriting. Beverley Allitt had been keeping trophies, not souvenirs, but memories. These diaries were her personal archive of suffering, and that was when I realized we were never dealing with someone who had snapped. We were never dealing with someone sick in the way hospitals understood. This was something deeper, darker. She wasn't driven by stress or compassion fatigue. She wasn't trying to ease suffering. She was creating it. And that made her something else entirely. A serial killer in scrubs, a predator among children, a woman who wore her hair in a bun and smiled at parents while writing their children's deaths into her diary like it was a bedtime story. I couldn't breathe when they told us. I sat on the curb outside the hospital and wept for the kids, for the parents, for the ones who survived but would never be the same, and for the ones who never got the chance. She had stolen lives from under our noses, and now, finally, it was catching up to her. The police were called. Investigation became official. The media hadn't caught on yet, but they would. And when they did, the world would finally see Beverley for what she really was. Not Nurse Allitt, not the angel of death, as they'd eventually nickname her, but a monster. One who had walked beside us, worked beside us, smiled beside us, all while counting the children she had destroyed. You never expect a serial killer to be the one who holds your hand when you're crying. You never expect a monster to spoon-feed yogurt to a toddler with a broken leg, or help an old woman wrap a birthday gift for her grandson. And yet, that's what Beverley Allitt was, an illusion of comfort, a disguise stitched from softness. I still remember one afternoon when she sat beside a mother whose son had just come out of a seizure. Beverley whispered gently, rubbed her back, and even cried. With her, she cried, the kind of cry that makes you believe someone is good. But now I know better, okay? Now I know that moment wasn't compassion. It was performance, was satisfaction wearing the face of sympathy. 'Cause that boy who clung to life through that seizure wasn't sick before Beverley walked into his room, and his mother. That tear-streaked woman, Beverley, pretended to comfort. She had no idea she was weeping beside the person who had just tried to take her son from her. It told Beverley's theater. She didn't just kill. She lingered afterward. She inserted herself into the aftermath. She loved being part of the drama she orchestrated. She wanted to be needed, even in the ruins she created. And if that sounds calculated, it was, because Beverley Allitt wasn't some confused, overwhelmed nurse. She was meticulous. And as the investigation unfolded, that became horrifically clear. When the police finally took her into custody, I felt this wave of conflicted relief. She was off the ward. The beds were quiet. The crash alarms stopped ringing at 2 a.m. The resuscitation cart stayed in place for days at a time. It was as if the hospital had exhaled. But peace didn't mean closure. Not for the families. Not for the surviving children. And not for us. Because what followed was a deeper kind of horror. The kind you don't see in the moment. Only when you start pulling back the layers and asking questions. Questions like, how long had she been doing this? How many near misses did we ignore? How many unexplained deaths had we labeled as sudden illness or complications when they were actually cold? Deliberate murders. The deeper the investigators dug, the more it unraveled. There wasn't just one diary. There were several, stashed in drawers, under her mattress, behind bookshelves. Some were disguised as crossword notebooks. Others had Lisa Frank stickers on them, like the journal of a teenager. And all of them were filled with the same disturbing entries: names, dates, dosages, comments like, tried 3 milliliters, worked better than expected, or stayed in coma, parents cried, sit, and then one phrase that has stuck in my mind like a splinter: I can't remove. How many children do I need before they see me? That line shattered something inside me. Yes, it wasn't just about death. It was about validation, power. She didn't just want to harm. She wanted to be noticed. She needed attention like oxygen. And when praise didn't come from saving lives, she sought it from ending them. As forensic psychologists later called it Munchausen syndrome by proxy. But honestly, I don't think that name does it justice. Munchausen implies a kind of subconscious illness, distorted need for attention through medical manipulation. But Beverley, she wasn't confused about what she was doing. She wasn't lost. She was in control. She planned her attacks around staff changes, around visitor hours, around parent schedules. She made sure to strike when there would be less oversight. She used quiet drugs, insulin, potassium, digoxin medications that could cause cardiac arrest, but were hard to trace. She logged fake vitals into patient charts, then discarded real evidence. And when children died, she helped prepare their bodies for the morgue. She tucked in their arms, brushed their hair, smiled. I heard she even whispered goodbye once. A child she killed. That's the kind of predator she was. One who didn't wear a mask because she was the mask. And here's where it gets worse. She almost got away with it, because for a while, the hospital still refused to make a public statement. They told the press she'd been suspended for protocol breaches. They said it was unrelated to patient care. That was a lie, a dangerous, cowardly lie. And I understood why they told it, because no hospital wants to be the one in the papers for harboring a child murderer. But that silence gave Beverley time. It's time to craft a new story. She denied everything, said she was being framed, said jealous colleagues had turned against her, that she loved children, that she was being targeted for her kindness. And believe it or not, people believed her. There were parents who came to her defense, who said she'd saved their kids, that she was being punished for caring too much. I don't blame them. She was that convincing. She had them on her side even after arrest. One mother even offered to bail her out, but the evidence was building. One by one, the threads came loose. Lab reports started showing elevated insulin levels in multiple victims, way beyond therapeutic ranges, unexplained, often unprescribed. Staff remembered Beverley lingering in rooms after her shift. Medical records were found, altered entries changed in her handwriting. CCTV from a nearby ward showed her entering a medication closet at 2:30 a.m. without authorization. And then came the final blow, the syringes. Hidden in a locker, she claimed, she'd never used, containing traces of insulin. Her fingerprints on 2 of them. She still denied it. She said someone planted them, that it was a smear campaign, but even her defense team began to falter. Eventually, the psychiatric evaluations were ordered, and it was only then that the full scope of her mind was exposed. The psychiatrists described her as emotionally detached, manipulative, with severe personality disorders and signs of factitious disorder. She lacked empathy. She showed no remorse. During interviews, she often deflected blame or made herself the victim. When asked about the children, she would smile or sometimes change the subject entirely. And when confronted with the names of the ones who died, she said, "I don't remember them all." That line hit me harder than anything else. I don't remember them all. As if they were ants she'd stepped on, not children with. Families, birthdays, futures, not tiny hands that reached for her when they were scared. That phrase echoed during the trial, 'cause yes, there was a trial. It was public, massive. The media finally caught wind, and the story exploded. Headlines called her the Angel of Death, but I hated that name. It made her sound divine, mythic, like some tragic figure. But Beverley wasn't an angel. She was a parasite. She fed off pain. The courtroom was packed with parents, nurses, press. I sat in the back. I needed to see it, needed to know justice would come. The prosecution laid out the timeline over a 59-day period. Beverley Allitt had attacked 13 children. 4 of them died. 9 survived, but many with lifelong disabilities, brains, damage, motor loss, trauma they would never outgrow. The defense didn't deny the facts anymore. Instead, they tried to argue diminished responsibility, that she was mentally ill, that she didn't understand what she was doing. But the jury didn't buy it. And neither did I, because if she truly didn't understand, she wouldn't have hidden evidence. She wouldn't have lied. She wouldn't have kept count. The verdict came in May of 1993. Guilty. Multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, and grievous bodily harm. She was sentenced to 13 life terms. The judge said she posed a serious danger to others for an indefinite period. But she didn't go to prison. Not really. She was sent to Rampton Secure Hospital, high security psychiatric facility. That part broke me, 'cause while I believe in justice, I also believe in consequences, okay? And it felt like Beverley had escaped something. A quiet room, a protected ward, 3 meals a day, no media, no confrontation, just silence. While her victims, those who lived, faced surgeries, feeding tubes, wheelchairs, trauma therapy, and the parents. They faced birthdays with no candles, empty chairs at the dinner table, photo albums they couldn't bring themselves to finish. I once visited the grave of Liam Taylor, her first confirmed victim. It's small, simple, just a name and 2 dates, July 1989, February 1991. He didn't even get 2 full years. And when I stood there, reading that stone, I thought about how easily this could have gone unnoticed. If Julie hadn't questioned that missing syringe, if I hadn't walked into that room and seen Beverley's hand on that IV, if Dr. Matthews had brushed us off, so many near misses, so many what ifs, and yet we caught her. Too late for some, yes, but we did. We stopped her, and that's what keeps me going now, because this story isn't just about death. It's about the danger of assumptions, of believing that kindness means safety, of trusting uniforms without question. Beverley taught us something terrible as it is, that monsters don't always come with warnings. Sometimes they come with soft voices and clean hands. Sometimes they bring coloring books. Sometimes they cry with you. I hadn't been trying to find anything. Okay, that's the part that still haunts me the most. I wasn't snooping or sneaking or setting some elaborate trap. I was just cold. It was early April, the kind of night where the chill sinks into the bones of the building itself, and the ancient radiators at Grantham and Kesteven hadn't worked right for years. I had an extra sweater in my locker. That was it. That's all it was supposed to be. I remembered how quiet the break room was when I stepped in. The hum of the vending machine. Okay, the fluorescent lights above flickering, just slightly, as they always did after midnight. The locker room was tucked away behind 2 swinging doors, rarely visited unless someone was clocking in or out. I punched in my code and tugged my locker open, and that's when I noticed it. Beverley's locker, just 2 down from mine, had a jagged little edge of black fabric caught in the corner of its door. Not unusual, she wore black cardigans constantly, even in summer. But the locker was slightly open, just a crack, like it hadn't latched properly. That's what I told myself. Nothing sinister, just careless. I should have walked away. I know that now, but there's something about curiosity. It lives in the space between your chest and your throat, clawing upward. It makes you ignore your better judgment. It makes you lean in just a little closer. I wasn't looking for a diary. I wasn't even looking for anything related to the deaths. I thought maybe she'd left food inside and forgotten. It may be a lunch gone bad, a bottle of milk souring. The hospital was strict about that sort of thing. I reached out and opened it without thinking. Inside was nothing special. It's a spare pair of scrubs, slightly folded, a hairbrush, a half-empty tin of mints, rolled up magazine with the corner bent and torn, and then, tucked at the bottom of the locker, beneath the shelf and wrapped in a brown paper bag like something disposable, was the notebook. It was black, with a torn binding and a worn elastic band holding it together. At first, I thought maybe it was a planner. Beverley was organized to a fault, always jotting things down, always scribbling on patient charts like she was trying to win a handwriting contest. But something about this notebook felt private, heavier, like it had been read 1,000 times by the same pair of hands. I shouldn't have touched it, but I did. Pulled it out, slowly, and peeled the paper bag away. The smell hit me first. Ink, dust, a hint of antiseptic, like the scent had clung to it from the ward. I opened it, just to the first page, and my stomach dropped. It was just a number. 1, written in red ink. No name, no explanation. It's just the number. I turned the page. 2, then 3, each with a short note underneath. Didn't fight. Stared at me the whole time. Wanted to say something, but couldn't. I flipped forward. Felt like God was watching me. I didn't stop. 7, so quiet. Didn't even blink. 8, I almost laughed. It was a kill list. I didn't want to believe it, but that's what it was. Names weren't listed, but the dates were tiny, scrawled in the upper right corners of the pages. And those dates, they matched. The deaths. I remembered them. I remembered their faces. Mrs. Hargreaves, Mr. Bailey, Mr. Collins, the exact nights they died. Each page had one number. Each number had one victim. One moment, one memory, hers. This wasn't just record keeping. This was ritual. Every single death immortalized in ink by the woman who caused them. My knees went weak. I had to sit down on the cold tile floor of the locker room, notebook open in my hands, staring at a killer's trophy case made out of paper. I flipped to the middle of the book, then the back. The final number listed was 12, and beside it, 2 words written in capital letters. Not enough. I don't remember how long I sat there. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been an hour. I remember my heart pounding like it was trying to tear through my ribs. I knew I should take it, report it, walk straight to the supervisor, or the police, or anyone who could do something. Okay, not right away. I closed the notebook, slowly, carefully. I rewrapped it in the brown bag and placed it exactly where I'd found it, right under the folded scrubs. I shut her locker and walked out of that room like I was sleepwalking. That's what fear does. Makes you freeze. Makes you do nothing when you should do everything. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my mattress, staring at the ceiling of my flat, replaying the diary over and over. The way she wrote, so calm, so deliberate. She wasn't ashamed of what she'd done. She was documenting it like a scientist, like she was proud of her work. The most chilling thing was how plain it was. No long rants, no weird symbols or blood smears or wild, manic handwriting. Just a list, just clean, numbered steps. A woman at work. The next day, I returned to the locker room. The notebook was gone. I didn't ask her about it. What would I even say? Hey, Beverley, did you move your murder journal? But I watched her. I watched her like my life depended on it. And maybe it did, because something changed in her after that night. Not visibly, not obviously, but subtly. Like a thread had been pulled. Somewhere deep inside her, and the fabric of her performance had started to unravel just a little. She was quieter in the break room. She didn't hum as much, Her jokes with the patients became shorter. And I noticed something else. She was always near me, always close to close. Like she was watching me, watching her. Started to wonder if she knew. She had seen the latch on her locker had moved. If she'd been keeping track of me just as closely as I was keeping track of her. I thought about quitting. I really did. Just packing my bags and never coming back. But I couldn't, because something inside me knew I was the only one who had seen the truth. And if I left, she'd keep going. She'd keep writing in that notebook, numbering the dead, counting them one by one, and then came the 13th. The 13th death wasn't supposed to happen. That's what I kept telling myself, over and over again, as I sat in the back stairwell of the hospital the night it happened, trembling and clutching my ID badge like it was some kind of charm against evil. Had spent 2 weeks tracking her every move, obsessing over every cough, every pill count, every shift she picked up that she hadn't been scheduled for. I thought I was ahead of her. I thought I could stop it. But death has a way of slipping through cracks when no one's looking, and Beverley somehow was always there when it did. His name was George Atherton, room 9B, 91 years old, kidney failure, DNR on file. And yet, he was improving. Slowly, yes. Fragile, yes. But he was smiling again, eating again. I'd sat with him 2 nights before, feeding him rice pudding and listening to stories about his days as a coal miner. He had this laugh, low, breathy, like gravel crunching under boot sand. When he chuckled at one of his own jokes, it echoed through the ward like something alive. When I came on shift that night, I noticed something off immediately. Beverley was already in 9B. That wasn't her patient. Not that night. She was covering Ward C, but there she was, standing by his bed, adjusting the 4 line like she belonged there. I froze at the threshold. She turned and smiled. That smile, the kind that's just skin. No soul behind it. He needed help sitting up, she said, casually. Poor thing slipped forward and couldn't reach the call button. I nodded like I believed her, but my chest was ice. The worst part? I didn't report her. I should have. God, I should have. But fear is a parasite. It wraps around your spine and squeezes until every decision feels like life or death. I told myself I'd just keep an eye on George, watch his vitals, make sure she didn't come near him again. I told myself I'd protect him. By 2:17 a.m., he was gone. No code blue, no monitor alarm, no struggle, just gone. A nursing aide had come in to check on him and found his lips blue, his chest still. CPR was never attempted. He was DNR after all. But when I arrived at his bedside, cold sweat dripping down the back of my neck, I knew it hadn't been natural. His chart showed no signs of distress. His vitals an hour earlier had been normal. His oxygen line was intact. Nothing made sense, except her. She had been the only one in that room. Again, I wanted to scream, to tear that black notebook from her hands and shove it in the face of our supervisors and shout, "Look at what she's doing," but I had no proof. No camera footage, no syringe, dent, no fingerprints. It's just a gut feeling that felt like it was going to rip me in half. And even worse than the guilt was the fear, because now I knew she was still keeping count. The notebook may have vanished, but the ritual hadn't. George Atherton was number 13, and then something changed. 3 days after his death, Beverley came in late. It's not just late disheveled. Her ponytail was loose. Her shoes were mismatched. She had smudges on her collar like she hadn't done laundry in days. She muttered something about a headache and walked straight past me like I didn't exist. That wasn't like her. She was always polished, always alert, always disturbingly composed. But that day, she looked, like something inside her was beginning to crack, Later that shift, I noticed her in the medication room. She was supposed to be on lunch break, but she was hunched over a locked drawer, her hands trembling, fiddling with a syringe she'd slipped from somewhere I hadn't seen. Peeked through the window in the door and watched her hold it up to the fluorescent light, squinting like she couldn't quite read the label. Then she did something that made my stomach drop. She smiled. It's the same way she'd smiled at George's bedside. It's the same way she had smiled at Mrs. Hargreaves when she fluffed her pillow before the sudden cardiac arrest. I backed away. My hands were shaking. My throat was dry. I had to do something. I waited until she left the room. Then I rushed in like a thief, heart hammering like a war drum. I opened the drawer she'd been fiddling with and saw what she'd left behind. A vial of potassium chloride, unsecured, half empty. I knew what that meant. Potassium chloride, when injected in high doses, causes cardiac arrest. It stops the heart, cleanly, quickly, almost silently, especially in the elderly whose hearts are already fragile. It wouldn't show up in a standard autopsy unless someone was looking for it. And no one had been looking till now. This was the weapon. This was how she'd done it. And yet, still, I froze. I didn't pocket the vial. I didn't run to security. I just stood there, staring at it like it might speak to me, confess on her behalf. I could feel the walls of the hospital closing in, the sterile air pressing against my lungs, the weight of knowing something no one else dared suspect. I left the room, slowly, calmly, like nothing had happened. I didn't confront her that night, but I knew something then that I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. She wasn't just playing God, she was keeping score. And George was only the beginning of the second round. 2 days later, another patient coded. This time it was a woman named Alice Green. I knew her well. She was sharp as a tack, despite being 83. We used to joke about her being too stubborn to die, and yet, she did. Alone. No warning. No signs. Beverley had just checked her vitals. She was number 14. After that, things moved quickly. Too quickly. Tension that had been growing quietly in the background suddenly exploded across the ward. Family members began asking questions. Why are so many patients passing in this wing? Why are the healthiest ones going first? Why is Nurse Allitt always nearby? Doctors began to murmur. Taint. Consultants double-checked charts. Can't. Someone, thank God, finally flagged a concern to management. Haynes' investigation was launched. Beverley didn't flinch. When questioned, she answered everything with calm precision. She smiled. She shrugged. She said she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. That old people die. That it was just a coincidence. And the scariest part? She almost got away with it. Almost, because just as the internal audit was wrapping up, someone found it. The notebook. Not in her locker. Not at her flat. But inside a rolled-up pillowcase hidden behind the radiator in the staff break room. Just sitting there, like it had been waiting to be found. This time, it had 16 entries. Each one matched a dead patient. Each one had chilling little comments beneath them. Still breathing after the first try. Took longer than expected. Watched me. Didn't blink. Like she knew. Wish I could have seen the look on her son's face. I think the next one should be noisier. Why stop now? When the police came, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just blinked once, slowly, and said, I don't know what you're talking about. But in her locker, they found another vial of potassium chloride. And in her flat, a box of old syringes used, cleaned, wrapped in tissue. Some still with trace residue. They asked me to testify. I told them everything about George, about Alice, about the night I found the diary. And the investigator, he asked me, point blank, why didn't you come forward earlier? I didn't have a good answer. Silence. Fear does that, but I live with it now. The guilt, the silence, the memory of her handwriting numbers in red ink, so clean, so methodical, so haunting. She kept a list of the dead, and I carry that list with me even now, years later. Sometimes I hear their names when I'm falling asleep. Sometimes I hear her voice, and sometimes, in my dreams, she's still writing, still counting, still not finished. After the notebook was found, the air inside the hospital seemed to change. It wasn't just tension anymore. It was dread. Thick, hanging dread, like tar smeared across the walls of every corridor. Staff who once laughed on their lunch breaks now avoided eye contact. Conversations dropped to a hush anytime her name came up. And worst of all, Lai was beginning to realize how many of us knew something, but said nothing. How many of us had seen the signs, heard the whispers, noticed the patterns, and just looked away. Because if you looked too closely at Beverley Allitt, you started to wonder if you could ever look away again. The police worked fast once the notebook surfaced. Her flat was searched, the entire pediatric and geriatric wards reviewed, and every chart she'd ever signed suddenly turned into a potential piece of evidence. But they weren't just hunting for the dead anymore. They were also trying to find the ones who lived. There were survivors, and those stories were often worse than the deaths. One of the first was a boy named Tim, just 6 years old at the time, with brittle bone disease. I remembered him, bright-eyed, always talking about dinosaurs. He'd come in with a fracture, but after a few days on the ward, things spiraled. Respiratory arrest, sudden unconsciousness, oxygen desaturation, no clear cause. 3 near-death episodes in 1 week, always when Beverley was on shift. No one had ever connected it until now. When detectives interviewed his mother, she broke down in the waiting room. She said something I've never forgotten. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was imagining it. But every time I left the room and came back, his monitor would be beeping. And she'd be there, just staring at him. The medical records were damning. Drugs that had never been prescribed. Vitals that mysteriously changed only when she was alone with the patient. And then, the handwritten notes, scribbled into margins of shift logs, or little post-it notes stuffed into patient files. Strange phrases like "doesn't respond like the others," or "this one's strong." One log entry just had a child's name, followed by a smiley face. She was playing with them like toys. Tim was one of the lucky ones, but the damage was done. He had brain damage from lack of oxygen. Permanent cognitive delays. His mother said he still had night terrors, not from the pain of his illness, but from dreams, where a lady with red hands stood over his bed, whispering, "She." And he wasn't the only one. Another survivor, an infant named Megan, had been brought in for feeding issues. But during her short stay, she went into cardiac arrest twice. Beverley had been the one to call the code, both times. She'd even performed CPR herself before help arrived. She was hailed as a hero, until now, 'cause when forensics went over the crash cart records, they noticed something. The potassium vials were always logged out, but never logged back in. The implications were horrifying. She wasn't just choosing the terminally ill. She was experimenting on the strong, on the weak, on the ones who had families, on the ones who couldn't speak. Testing how much she could do, and how long it would take before anyone noticed. She had almost gotten away with all of it. Almost. What struck me the most during the investigation was how emotionless she remained. During interviews, she didn't flinch when names were read aloud. She didn't cry when they showed her photos of the children. She didn't even blink when they asked her point blank, "Did you kill them?" Her answer, "I was just doing my job." And in a way, maybe she believed that, because Beverley had wrapped herself in the identity of a caregiver, the one who noticed the little things, the one who stayed late, the one who brought patients warm blankets and offered tissues to crying mothers. She wore the mask so well that most people never thought to look beneath it. But I had seen what was underneath, and now the whole country was about to, because the press got hold of it. The headline exploded across the front pages. Angel of Death. Nurse charged with murdering children and elderly in her care. I remembered the day the news broke. Reporters swarmed the front of the hospital. Staff were instructed not to talk, but some did anyway. Some defended her. She was always so gentle. One said, "I can't believe she'd hurt anyone." Others admitted they'd had suspicions, but never imagined it was murder. But what chilled me most was the photo they chose to run. It was a smiling portrait of Beverley in her uniform, holding a clipboard and grinning beside a child's bed. The child in the photo, one of her victims, had to close the paper. I felt sick. That same fake smile, weaponized now across every TV screen in the country. The trial began 6 months later. It was packed. Media, families, survivors, former patients in wheelchairs. I was there too, not just as a witness, but because I had to see it through. I had to know if she would finally be forced to see what she'd done. The prosecution built a meticulous case. They showed charts, autopsies, photographs, but the most damning evidence was that damn notebook. Page after page projected onto the courtroom screens, her neat handwriting like a confession in slow motion. Dates, times, dosages, names, and always a number. The number grew as the pages turned. 11, 12, 13, and then, circled in red ink, 15. No one suspected. Might stop here. Can, beneath that, like an afterthought, or maybe not. The defense tried to argue stress, mental illness, dissociative states. They brought in psychologists who used words like Munchausen by proxy and attention-seeking syndrome. They painted her as a fragile, overworked caregiver who had snapped under the weight of a broken system. But I knew better. We all did, because someone who snaps doesn't keep a diary. They don't plan their victims by number. They don't choose moments when other nurses are on break. They don't tamper with files, erase logs, switch medications, falsify records. That's not chaos. That's control. And Beverley Allitt craved control like oxygen. When I took the stand, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my statement. I looked across the courtroom at her. She didn't look back. She stared at the table, her expression blank, empty, like she wasn't really there at all. I told them about George, about Alice, about how I'd watched her again and again, how the deaths had followed her like shadows. I told them I hadn't spoken up in time, and I told them I was sorry. Not for her, never for her, but for every family who didn't get to say goodbye after 12 weeks of testimony. The jury deliberated for just 4 days. They returned with a verdict of guilty on all counts: 4 murders, 3 attempted murders, and multiple counts of grievous bodily harm. The judge called her deeply dangerous and a threat to the very profession she represented. She was sentenced to 13 life terms, 1 for each confirmed death, plus additional time for the survivors. They said she'd never leave prison, but even that didn't feel like justice, because how do you punish someone who took joy in watching life fade from innocent faces? How do you punish someone who used compassion as camouflage and murder as medicine? You don't. You contain them. You bury them in stone walls and barbed wire in cold gray corridors. Forget their name if you can. But the survivors, they don't get to forget. I met Tim again years later. He was in his teens by then, slower than his peers, but smiling, always smiling. His mother introduced me, said he doesn't remember her, but sometimes he asks about the hospital. Then she whispered something I'll never forget. He still doesn't like red pens. When they finally locked her away, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a delay, a holding pattern, like Beverley Allitt had just been moved to a different kind of ward, one with thicker doors and guards instead of nurses. She wasn't. out of the system. She had simply found her way deeper inside it. After the sentencing, the public frenzy began to die down. For a while, there was talk of reforms, audits, policies, psychological screenings for nurses, but inside the hospital walls, there was a silence that felt heavier than the noise. Her name became a curse we didn't speak aloud. Even the break room, where she used to sip tea and chat about patients, was scrubbed, cleaned, and reassigned to a different department. But I couldn't let it go, because I knew something that not even the papers understood. I knew she hadn't stopped. Not really. You see, they didn't send her to an ordinary prison. Beverley was deemed too fragile for standard incarceration. The court declared she was suffering from a severe personality disorder, and as a result, she was placed in Rampton Secure Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility for the criminally insane. That name, R-A-M-P-T-O-N, it sent a chill down my spine the first time I heard it. I'd seen cases from there before, people who were killed in ways that didn't make sense to normal minds. People who smiled during sentencing. People who laughed at funerals. People like her. Beverley was given her own room, her own daily routine, monitored meals, escorted walks, medication, supervision. She was a patient again, but this time she wore a different mask, one of passive compliance. She played the role of the remorseful nurse, soft-spoken, gentle, reflective. But beneath that, there was still something hollow in her, something terribly alive. I kept tabs on her case. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop. I found myself looking up updates, reading statements from the hospital, watching for any hint that she'd shown real remorse, but nothing ever came. She didn't speak at the trial. She didn't write apologies. And she didn't ask to meet with any of the families. What she did do was start writing letters. That's how I knew she hadn't stopped. It started with a former colleague, a night nurse who had worked a few shifts with Beverley during those last weeks at the pediatric ward. One day, she opened her mailbox and found a handwritten envelope. No return address, just her name, scrawled in a looping, childlike script. Inside, a single sheet of paper, no greeting, just a sentence. I liked the way you watched me. No signature, no explanation. Stat, hand. When she reported it, the handwriting matched samples from the diary. It was Beverley's. More letters followed. One nurse received a drawing of a teddy bear with X's 4 eyes. Another got a blank Polaroid photo with the words, "You missed one." One woman, a ward administrator who had testified against her, got a small packet of talcum powder in the mail. Nothing else. No charges were filed. No fingerprints were found. But the implication was clear. She remembered us, and she was still playing games. The public never heard about the letters. Authorities kept it quiet, hoping to avoid media frenzy. But within the hospital circles, the rumors spread like wildfire. We started warning each other to check mail carefully. Some even moved house. Others just disappeared, quietly quitting the profession, leaving town, going off-grid. One doctor retired early and moved to Wales without telling anyone. She never physically touched them again. But Beverley knew how to haunt you, and then got a visitor. That was when everything shifted. He was a man in his 30s, quiet, pale, balding, claimed to be a journalist working on a book about criminal psychology. Said he was fascinated by the intersection of caregiving and cruelty. At first, Rampton staff allowed the visits. They were supervised, controlled, just 2 people, in a room with a table between them. But the conversations were unsettling. According to leaked records, he asked about her methods, her patterns, her choices, not with outrage, with curiosity. One nurse overheard him ask, "Did it feel like you were choosing who deserved to live?" Beverley apparently smiled. That was the first smile she'd shown in months. Soon the visits became regular, weekly, then twice a week. He brought notebooks, tape recorders. She grew animated during the interviews, started writing again. The hospital staff logged everything, but when concerns were raised, the man produced credentials and claimed academic interest. But what disturbed me most was that he wasn't alone. Over the next year, Beverley received 14 other visitors. Some were women, some men. All claimed to be writers, researchers, students. They would sit across from her and talk for hours. Some requested locked room privacy. One asked to bring in comfort items, a blanket, a teddy bear. Another requested to review her old nursing files with her present. He said it was part of his thesis. The staff at Rampton began to refer to them as the morning club behind closed doors, but not because they mourned the victims. They mourned Beverley's capture. At least 3 were later found to have written fan letters to other high-profile killers. 2 had attempted to send cash into her prison account. One woman was caught trying to smuggle in a vial of nail polish, which Beverley wasn't allowed to have. No one could explain how these people gained visitation clearance, but they came, and they stayed. She had found a new kind of audience. The letters increased again, more cryptic. One nurse received a note that said, simply, "The silence makes it easier." I received one too. It arrived 5 years after her sentencing. No stamp, just hand-delivered to the mail slot of my home. I remember everything about it: the weight of the envelope, the off-white paper, the scent of hospital disinfectant still clinging to the corners inside. A photo. It was a photocopy, actually, of her hands, just her hands, palms down, lying flat on a table, and written across the top in thick red marker. I missed the little ones. No return address, no fingerprints. The handwriting matched. I sat on my couch for hours that night, holding it, staring at it. Not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because I understood exactly what it meant. She missed the feeling of control. She missed being in the room when someone stopped breathing. She missed the power. Beverley was no longer killing patients, but she was still hunting, still lingering in our minds, still writing her story in the margins of other people's lives, and she knew it. That's what made her so dangerous. She didn't need a scalpel or a syringe anymore. She just needed space in your memory. Over the years, reports began to suggest she was petitioning for a transfer to a lower security unit. The justification? Improved behavior. Model patient. No longer a threat. I wanted to scream, because I'd seen this pattern before. The sweetness, the cooperation, the way she slid into roles like costumes, nurse, victim, penitent. But deep down, Beverley Allitt was something else entirely. She was empty, not broken, not shattered, just absent, like something important had never been there in the first place. The term angel of death never sat right with me. It sounded too poetic, too clean. She wasn't an angel. She wasn't even a monster, really. She was a vacancy, a blank space that wore a uniform and smiled at children and took meticulous notes while they died. And now she was watching us again from inside those walls, waiting, planning, remembering, because when someone like Beverley Allitt is allowed to live in isolation for long enough, she doesn't fade away. She sharpens, and I fear the world isn't ready for what happens when she's handed another pen. I wish I could tell you it ended with her arrest, that once they locked Beverley away, the sickness stopped spreading, that it was confined, quarantined like a virus behind glass. But it didn't end. It evolved by the time she'd been at Rampton for 10 years. Something new had started forming around her, something that I could only describe as devotion. It didn't look like what we imagine when we hear followers or obsessed fans. There were no screaming admirers outside the gates, no flowers sent in through legal channels. No one was carving her name into their skin or tattooing her initials. It was quieter, more patient, more dangerous. It started with one of the Rampton staff, a junior nurse named Fiona R., in her early 30s. She'd transferred from a smaller mental health facility up north, a place that didn't deal with high-profile criminals. Kiona was soft-spoken, polite, a bit anxious from what others recalled. She wasn't on Beverly's direct care team, but she worked in the same ward, passed her in the halls, observed her meals, handled her laundry request forms. On paper, it looked like nothing, but one day, Fiona didn't show up for work. Her flat was unlocked, her uniform still on the drying rack. Nothing missing except her journal and her mobile phone. 3 days later, security at Rampton found a note slipped under the ward psychologist's office door. It read, "There's more than one way to care for them." I understand her now. She never wanted to hurt anyone. She wanted to quiet them, the way a mother quiets a crying child. The silence is a gift. Wasn't signed, but the handwriting wasn't Beverly's. They reviewed every surveillance tape they had, every shift Fiona worked, every hallway she walked. No infractions, no direct contact with Beverly, except one time. 4 weeks before her disappearance, she'd assisted another nurse delivering medication to Beverly's room. The visit lasted under 4 minutes. Beverly didn't say a word, didn't even look up, but somehow, in those 4 minutes, something had changed. It reminded me of radiation. You don't feel it when it touches you. You don't even know it's there. But you walk out different. Fiona was never found. The hospital ruled it a voluntary disappearance, but internally, alarms started ringing. They went through every staff member who had any interaction with Beverly. Some were cleared. Others were put on leave. One nurse was fired when a search of her bag revealed printed articles about other medical killers. Harold Shipman, Janine Jones, Charles Cullen. None of this made the news. Rampton didn't want a scandal, but the cracks were starting to show. And what came next, I still have trouble talking about it, because it happened outside in the real world. And it began with a copycat. It was in Surrey, a small elder care facility. Nothing unusual. Clean track record, quiet staff. Then one day, an 86-year-old woman coded unexpectedly. She'd had mild dementia, but was otherwise stable. She passed within minutes of receiving her medication. Number. Autopsy was performed. Was ruled as age-related cardiac failure. But 2 weeks later, it happened again. Another patient. Similar profile. Sudden collapse. Still, nothing seemed suspicious until the third death. This time, a 72-year-old man in good health died after his insulin levels dropped catastrophically low. He hadn't been diabetic. That's when someone started asking questions. In all 3 cases had one common thread. A new nurse, 20-7 years old, female, clean record, is transferred from a Midlands hospital. Her name was Alice F., but she had started signing her notes as a LLI. When police searched her locker, they found a pocket-sized notepad with lists. Each entry had a patient's name, date, and terrifyingly, a single number in red ink next to it, the number of minutes it had taken for the patient to stop breathing. She had been timing them. She was arrested before she could claim another victim. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But what chilled the detectives to the core was her answer when asked why she did it. She whispered. She showed me how. There was no direct link to Beverly Allitt. No letters, no messages, no prison visitation history. But Alice had, during her nursing school years, written a term paper titled Case Study, Beverley Allitt and the Psychology of Caregiver Control. She had studied her, memorized her, and now she had mimicked her. The press picked up on it for a moment. A brief headline storm. Nurse copycat may have idolized child killer, but it faded fast. The legal system buried the details, sealing her confession. They said she acted alone, but I knew better. I started seeing it everywhere. Online forums, anonymous blogs, dark web message boards dedicated to so-called angel mercy cases. Most were sick fantasy, but some were worse organized thought. Posts breaking down Beverley's methods, debates about her psychological diagnosis, praise for her restraint. She was being mythologized, not like a celebrity, like a blueprint. When Rampton staff found out about the Surrey copycat, they increased surveillance. Beverley was moved to a more restricted wing. Her visitors were cut off. Her letters were screened more aggressively. Her mail was limited to family only, what was left of them. But the damage was done. The myth had leaked. And what's most terrifying, I believe she knew it would. That quiet demeanor, the calculated way she said so little during her trial. The absence of theatrics. It wasn't apathy, it was strategy. Beverley Allitt didn't want to go down as a monster. She wanted to disappear behind a whisper. A story only a certain type of person would hear, and they did. One of the detectives who worked the original Grantham case once told me something I'll never forget. We were sitting in a pub near King's Cross, years after it was all over. He was retired by then, gray-bearded, tired, but still sharp. He sipped his pint, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You ever wonder if she wanted to be caught?" I laughed at first, seemed absurd, but then he said, "Not because she felt guilty, because she knew she couldn't do it forever. So instead, she made herself into a story that could." I haven't slept right since, because that's what she became. A story, a template, a quiet virus that spreads not through action, but through thought, through possibility. We talk about monsters in past tense because it comforts us. She was, she did, she's gone. But what if she isn't? What if she's just transformed? What if she's now 100 fragmented whispers in the minds of others? In the past year alone, there have been 4 new cases of suspected caregiver homicides in Europe, all under 30 years old, all women, all citing emotional overwhelm, dissociation, impulse control issues. Each one mentioned feeling calm during the death. Each one had a prior academic interest in notorious nurses. No one says her name anymore in connection, but she's there in the background, in the silence, between heartbeats, in the tick of a syringe being prepped in the quiet of a ward. At night, Beverley Allitt may be behind glass, but her story is loose, and it doesn't care how long it takes, because the scariest thing about monsters like her isn't that they exist, it's that they make others believe they're right. The pages, the evaluations, the real medical files, the parts the public wasn't supposed to read, for years, tried to get access to them. Most of it was redacted, buried under layers of legal protection, and politely denied under the excuse of ongoing psychiatric containment. But eventually, after over a decade of waiting and requesting through obscure freedom of information routes and private sources, one document arrived anonymously at my doorstep. No note, no return address, just a thick, padded envelope in a single word typed across the front. Silently inside was a copy, not the original, but someone had scanned it, page by page, of a psychiatric report dated November 14th, 1995, 3 years after Beverley had been committed to Rampton Secure Hospital. It wasn't just any report. This was a classified longitudinal behavioral assessment meant for internal use by the Ministry of Justice's Forensic Psychiatry Division. Only a handful of people were cleared to read it. Now, so was I, and what was inside. It kept me up for a month. Let me walk you through it, not with the cold distance of a reporter, but the eyes of someone reading it for the first time in the yellow light of a kitchen at 3:17 a.m., with the world silent around me, and something unspeakable in my hands. The opening page was titled, Subject 2471B, Evaluation for Long-Term Containment Viability and Ideological Dissociation Syndrome. Underneath that were 2 words, underlined twice, Beverley Allitt. There were no introductory paragraphs, no preamble. The first line, of text read. Subject exhibits disarming affect and prosocial mimicry traits, consistent with high-functioning personality, compartmentalization. Diagnostic labels applied to date may be reductive. That chilled me more than any photo. I'd read thousands of reports in my career, but never had I seen a psychiatrist warn against underestimating a subject's diagnosis. The report broke down her behaviors across 3 axes: I, facial affect, and social PER. 4 May and CI examiners noted that Beverley demonstrated a nearly flawless ability to mirror the facial expressions, tone, and emotional cadence of whomever she was speaking to. When she spoke to male orderlies, she'd present meek, vulnerable, an innocent girl lost in the system. With female staff, she appeared more composed, occasionally flirtatious, often deferential. In group sessions, she maintained eye contact, just long enough to appear engaged, but rarely volunteered thoughts of her own. Instead, she would echo other sentiments in slightly reworded forms. One psychiatrist noted, "It is as if she is assembling a personality from those around her in real time." Another wrote, "There is no center to her affect, only an echo chamber." 2. Internal ideation and obsessional thought. La OPs, here's where things got darker. In private interviews, Beverley would sometimes retreat into long silences, not defiance, just quiet. First, they thought it was trauma-based dissociation. But then, one interviewer, a Dr. Helen Montrose, conducted a test. She asked Beverley to free associate for 60 seconds. Say whatever came into her head. What followed was transcribed word for word. Glass, hospital, numbers, cough, red, monitor, beep, 15 nurse, needle, no one listening, baby, crying, mother, can't stop it, silence, silence, silence. Then Beverley smiled and said, "Is that what you wanted?" Montrose concluded that Beverley's mental loops were not involuntary. They were curated. Her mind wasn't spiraling. It was organizing, carefully, like a file cabinet. That's when the term ideological dissociation syndrome was first applied. Not a real DSM label, but one coined by the internal team. It referred to a new psychological theory they were quietly exploring, the idea that certain individuals, when exposed to power in fragile environments, can develop a godlike self-concept that justifies control, harm, and domination while feeling none of the typical emotional recoil. To simplify, they start to believe silence is a mercy, and their job is to deliver it. One evaluator, Dr. R. Denslow, wrote this chilling observation. There is an almost priest-like stillness in the way she discusses death. Not joy, not sadness, just authority. 3. Private artifacts, the diary pages. This was the section that hit hardest. I'd heard rumors that Beverley kept a diary in Rampton, that she was allowed a journal, but I assumed, like most high-risk patients, it was read and confiscated. But apparently, for several months in 1995, she was permitted to keep a small composition notebook under supervised conditions. One day, a new nurse forgot to retrieve it. Beverley had written 12 pages. What I read next is what shook me to my core. Here are some actual transcriptions from the report. March 4. She wouldn't stop crying. I held her wrists so gently. She was gasping like a fish. I wanted her to feel held, not hurt, but no one understands that. They think pain is the opposite of care. It isn't. Indifference is. March 9th. I heard a girl scream today in the next ward. I wondered how long it would take to stop her. I could do it in under 3 minutes. I know, because I timed it once. I missed the stopwatch. March 14th. They ask if I feel remorse. I don't understand the word. I feel memory. I feel structure. There was a system, and I followed it. Why do they punish systems? March 15th. Sometimes I think if they would let me speak on TV, I could help others stop the crying. Show them how. I'd be good on camera. I know when to blink. March 17th. Fiona watches me when she thinks I can't see. She's learning. That last one that confirmed everything. Fiona, the nurse who vanished. The one who left the strange note. The one they could never link to Beverley directly. Beverley knew she was watching. She let her. She cultivated her, like a gardener in a locked room. And now, thanks to a forgotten journal and a smuggled scan, I had the evidence. They never released it. Wasn't just that Beverley was aware of her influence. She was engineering it, like the silent conductor of a symphony that no one else could hear. When the diary was discovered, it was immediately confiscated and locked away in Rampton's internal evidence vault. The nurse who failed to retrieve it was quietly dismissed. No charges. No disciplinary press release. They didn't want questions. They didn't want patterns. But they were there, and they still are, because as I sit here, typing these words under the dim light of a single lamp, I keep thinking about what she wrote. Sometimes I think if they would let me speak on TV, I could help others stop the crying, to show them how. It sounds like a threat, but I think it was a wish. She didn't want to be famous in the loud, tabloid way. She wanted to be instructional, like a textbook, a method, a blueprint. And now, with her myth alive, and more cases cropping up every year, whispering her tone, following her silence, I think she got what she wanted. The diary pages were meant to be buried. The report wasn't supposed to leave RIMP, but now you've heard them. And now you know that this wasn't madness. It was architecture done, and somewhere, in the quiet of a night shift ward, another young caregiver might be reading her story, not with horror, but with curiosity. And all it takes is one quiet moment, one needle, one press of a button, to silence another cry, and then another and another, until we stop hearing them at all. The courtroom lights had dimmed months ago. Beverley Allitt was behind bars, locked away in Rampton Secure Hospital. The news cycles had moved on, replaced by fresher horrors, newer faces, and different tragedies. But for the families left behind, the nightmare was far from over. It didn't end with a verdict or a sentence. It became a slow-burning fire that scorched every waking moment, a trauma that gnawed at the edges of their lives. I spent years tracking down the families of her victims and survivors, trying to understand what justice meant to them now, decades after the headlines faded. What I found was heartbreaking. For some, the memories had frozen in time. They spoke in clipped sentences, eyes distant, hands clenched. The parents who lost children described holidays marked by empty chairs, birthdays that never felt the same. The survivors carried scars no doctor could heal, permanent damage, shattered innocence, a fractured childhood. But the strangest part came from those who never even met. Beverley, the ones who received letters. The first letter, it started small. A mother named Carol contacted me, her voice shaking as she recounted the day she found a plain envelope slipped under her front door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully, with a childish drawing of a teddy bear, eerily similar to one Beverley had sent during her Rampton days. Below the drawing was a handwritten message. They never hear the quiet ones, but I do. I hold them close. I am watching. Carol's son, Matthew, had been one of Beverley's victims. He died on the pediatric ward at just 4 years old. She'd never spoken publicly about the letter before. The police investigated, but no leads emerged. Carol showed me the letter. The ink was faint, but unmistakably written in red pen, the same color Beverley favored. It was the beginning of a pattern. Letters across the country within the following 2 years. Similar letters arrived at the homes of 4 other families, linked to Beverley's victims and survivors. One letter to a woman named Janet included a pressed flower and a short poem. Quiet falls like snow at night. I cradled the silent light. Another letter sent to a former pediatric nurse had no words at all. Just a photograph of empty hospital beds in a dim corridor. Every letter bore one unmistakable signature, the unique handwriting style from Beverley's notebooks, accompanied by a faint scent of disinfectant. Each letter arrived months after the official trial and sentencing. The police called them phantom correspondences, untraceable, anonymous, and deeply unsettling. Who was sending the letters? Initial theories blamed obsessed fans or copycats. But the letters carried details only someone with inside knowledge could know: specific dates, medication types, cues, even phrases Beverley used in her diaries. The idea that Beverley herself was sending these letters from inside Rampton became an unsettling possibility, despite strict mail monitoring. Some staff whispered about clandestine exchanges, messages smuggled out through unsuspecting workers, visitors, or even corrupt guards. A former Rampton employee who asked to remain anonymous told me she has ways, quiet ways. People who visit her don't always come out the same. Psychological toll, the letters reopened wounds no one wanted to touch. Families were thrust back into a world of fear and suspicion. Had Beverley truly never left him? Was she still controlling their lives from behind the hospital walls? Therapists who worked with the families spoke of severe anxiety, insomnia, and PTSD resurfacing years after the initial trauma. One psychologist explained the uncertainty. Not knowing if the letters are a warning or a taunt makes closure impossible. It's like the past is alive and breathing. Case of the missing father. One of the most haunting stories came from a man named Philip, whose daughter, Alice, survived Beverley's ward but carried permanent brain damage. Philip received a letter addressed simply to father. Inside was a child's drawing, a son with a jagged smile and a cryptic note. The silence grows. She waits in the stillness. Remember? Philip showed me the letter with tears in his eyes. He said, "I don't know if it's from her or someone else, but it feels like a message meant to hurt." Philip vanished a month later. No one saw him again. Police searched but found no clues. Some speculate he fled in fear. Others whisper of darker possibilities. The hospital's response, Rampton and the Ministry of Justice, denied any breach or unauthorized correspondence. They claimed mail was strictly monitored and censored, but whistleblowers suggest otherwise. One nurse revealed, "There are corners no cameras watch. People have their secrets." In 2017, A's internal investigation was launched after a package containing a drawing, and a note was found in the hospital's mailroom. The note read, "Quiet keeps the peace. Loud silences break chains." The investigation was quickly closed without explanation. The last letter, the final letter I'm aware of, arrived at my own doorstep. No stamp, no postmark, just a folded piece of paper. Inside was a phrase scrawled in red pen: "The silence never forgets. Neither do I." It was unsigned, but I knew it was hers. What does it all mean? The letters are more than just taunts. They are reminders, echoes of a presence no one can fully escape. Beverley Allitt's shadow extends beyond the physical. Her silence, her ideology, haunts families, hospitals, and even those who seek to understand her. She crafted a legacy, not of violence alone, but of psychological terror that lingers in the quiet spaces of our lives. As I write this, I can't help but wonder how many more letters exist, how many more families carry invisible chains forged in silent wards. Because Beverley Allitt didn't just kill, she taught others how to be silent killers. And now, that silence speaks. When Beverley Allitt's crimes first hit the headlines, the world was stunned. A nurse, someone entrusted with the care of children, accused of systematically harming and killing the very patients she was meant to protect. The betrayal was total, was horror unimaginable. But what followed was a media storm unlike any other. The initial headlines, shock and outrage. The press wasted no time. From the moment she was arrested, headlines screamed with outrage and disbelief. Angel of death or cold-blooded killer. The nurse who played God with children's lives. How could she do this? A community in morning newspapers plastered her photo everywhere. The innocent smile she wore in staff photos contrasted with the darkness of the accusations. TV stations aired breaking news segments, and pundits debated whether she should be labeled a monster or a tragic figure. Public anger boiled over. Many people in Grantham and beyond demanded swift justice. Protests formed outside the hospital, with parents and community members seeking answers and assurances that such a nightmare would never happen again. The trial begins. Courtroom drama. The trial was televised, a rare occurrence in Britain at the time, drawing viewers in the millions. The courtroom became a stage for the darkest stories imaginable. Survivors testified about near-death experiences. Nurses described the fear that spread through the wards, and forensic experts detailed the horrifying evidence of deliberate overdoses and suffocations. Beverley, however, remained mostly silent. She showed little emotion, answering questions in a quiet, monotone voice. To some, this silence was chilling. To others, it was a sign of mental illness. Her defense team argued that she suffered from a personality disorder that impaired her judgment, a claim hotly disputed by the prosecution. The birth of the Angel of Death myth as the trial unfolded. The media seized on the nickname Angel of Death. It was catchy, sensational, terrifying, but it painted Beverley as something almost supernatural, a grim figure hovering over hospital beds, healing death with a gentle hand. Some journalists pushed this narrative to extremes, focusing on her nurturing image rather than the gruesome reality of her crimes. They portrayed her as a tragic figure, a broken angel who lost control. This myth took root in the public imagination and distorted the true horror of her actions. The public divided sympathy versus outrage. Strangely, the media's portrayal split public opinion. Some sympathized with Beverley, believing she was a victim of mental illness who needed treatment, not punishment. Others saw her as the embodiment of evil. Support groups for nurses also emerged, some defending her as an example of the pressures healthcare workers face, others condemning her as a warning. It was a complicated and confusing time. Behind the headlines, families' perspectives, while the media danced around the mythology. Families of victims suffered quietly. Many spoke out against the nickname, calling it disrespectful and cruel. They wanted Beverley remembered not as an angel, Kit, but as a killer who shattered their lives. One mother told reporters, "My son didn't die because of some angelic mercy. He died because someone chose to end his life." The trial's aftermath, a media blackout, and public forgetting after Beverley was sentenced. The media frenzy slowly faded. News outlets moved on to the next big story. The nickname remained in the public lexicon but lost its immediacy. The community struggled to heal. Hospitals implemented stricter controls, but whispers of mistrust lingered. Yet, despite the public's forgetting, psychological legacy endured. How the myth shaped her legacy, the Angel of Death label, did more than sensationalize, obscured the real nature of her crimes and the warning signs that could have prevented them. It turned a brutal killer, Harry, into a tragic figure, fostering dangerous sympathies and inspiring the copycats we discussed earlier. It also masked the cold, calculated control Beverley exerted, the methodical silence that accompanied her every act. Media lessons, reporting on evil looking back. The coverage of Beverley Allitt offers important lessons about how media shapes public understanding of crime. Sensationalism sells, but it can distort reality and hurt victims. The media's framing influenced everything from public opinion to judicial proceedings. Closing reflections. Beyond myth and media, as I researched this story, I saw the tension between myth and reality everywhere. Beverley Allitt wasn't a supernatural angel or just a broken nurse. She was something far more terrifying, a human being who weaponized her role, her silence, and her charm to kill. Her story teaches us to look beyond headlines and ask difficult questions about power, trust, and evil, because sometimes monsters don't roar. Sometimes they smile quietly in a nurse's uniform. The moment Beverley Allitt was arrested was just the beginning. Behind the scenes, a tireless team of detectives, forensic experts, and hospital staff began piecing together a nightmare that no one had fully grasped. The investigation that followed was one of the most complex and emotionally taxing in British medical crime history, and it revealed horrors that still haunt those involved. The initial suspicion, it all started with anomalies. Sudden patient deaths on the pediatric ward, strange medication errors, unexplained cardiac arrests. Nurses whispered about shifts when vital signs plummeted for no clear reason. But in a busy hospital, tragedy is sadly expected, and mistakes happen. Detective Inspector Graham Finney was assigned to the case. A seasoned investigator with a reputation for patience and thoroughness, he was skeptical of early rumors. But as the deaths mounted, he knew something was wrong. The breakthrough, medical records, and medication logs. Investigation zeroed in on medication records. Pharmacists cross-checked dosage logs, nurses' notes, and patient charts. Looking for discrepancies, they found them. Large doses of insulin, powerful opiates, and muscle relaxants had been administered without medical orders. Even more chilling, some doses had been given shortly before patients collapse. Beverley's pattern emerges. Finney and his team noticed the pattern shifts when Beverley was working coincided with spikes in patient emergencies. Her meticulous note-taking and apparently caring bedside manner initially masked the true danger. She was methodical, precise. Her attacks were hidden in the daily chaos of hospital work. Forensic evidence. The autopsies pathologists performed multiple autopsies on the deceased children. Many deaths had been attributed to natural causes or complications, but the forensic team uncovered evidence of toxicology consistent with deliberate overdoses. It was a breakthrough that shattered the hospital's assumptions and raised terrifying questions. Interviewing Beverley during interrogations. Beverley remained disturbingly calm. She gave few answers. Her silence was deafening. Detectives found it hard to gauge remorse or guilt. Her cold demeanor only deepened their suspicion. Challenges and obstacles. The investigation faced obstacles. Hospital administrators initially resisted scrutiny, worried about reputation. Some staff were reluctant to speak, fearing repercussions. Detectives battled bureaucracy and silence. The emotional toll on investigators. Finney later spoke about the psychological toll. I saw things no one should see, he said. The pain of those families was my fuel and my burden. Breakthroughs from whistleblowers' turning point came when a few brave nurses stepped forward, sharing suspicions and observations. Their courage broke the wall of silence and moved the case forward. The final pieces of the puzzle: forensic evidence, eyewitness accounts, and medication audits built an airtight case. Beverley's pattern of actions was undeniable, closing the case when charges were finally laid. It was a moment of relief and dread. Relief that justice was beginning. Dread at the full extent of her actions. The courtroom was packed. Cameras, reporters, and an audience gripped by a mixture of horror and fascination filled every available seat. The air was heavy with anticipation, but beneath it was something darker, a collective sense that what was unfolding was more than a trial. It was a reckoning. I wasn't in that courtroom, but I followed every moment like a shadow, piecing together the story from transcripts, interviews, and eyewitness accounts. This chapter is what I uncovered, the layers of drama, denial, and raw human emotion that played out behind those closed doors. Opening statements. Setting the stage, the prosecution opened with a stark declaration. Beverley Allitt was a calculating killer who betrayed the sacred trust of her profession and shattered countless lives. They laid out the evidence methodically, pointing to a pattern of overdoses, falsified records, and deliberate harm. The defense, in contrast, painted a very different picture. They argued Beverley was mentally ill, suffering from a complex personality disorder that clouded her judgment. They portrayed her as a broken woman, overwhelmed by stress and internal demons. Her actions, they claimed, were not premeditated murder, but manifestations of psychological illness. The defense's key strategy, mental illness, and diminished responsibility throughout the trial. The defense focused on proving Beverley's mental state compromised her ability to distinguish right from wrong. Psychiatric experts were called to testify about her diagnoses, including borderline personality disorder and factitious disorder imposed on another. They argued she was driven by an uncontrollable impulse rather than malice, but the prosecution countered with evidence of deliberate timing and calculated actions, a cold, clinical precision that couldn't be dismissed as mere illness. Witness testimonies, survivors, and staff speak. The courtroom grew silent as survivors and hospital staff took the stand. Some barely older than children, their voices trembled as they recounted moments of terror, sudden collapses, the sensation of suffocation, blurred memories of pain. One nurse spoke of how Beverley's calm presence masked something sinister. Another recalled overhearing conversations about unexplained patient deteriorations and suspicious medication errors. Each testimony added a new piece to the puzzle, painting a picture of fear and betrayal within the hospital walls. Beverley's demeanor, silence, and composure throughout the proceedings. Beverley remained mostly silent. When questioned, she offered brief, monotone answers, often avoiding eye contact. To some observers, this stoicism was chilling, a cold detachment that suggested guilt. To others, it seemed a sign of a fractured psyche. Her silence became a focal point of media commentary, sparking debate about her true nature. Cross-examinations. Intense psychological battle, the cross-examinations were grueling. Prosecutors pressed Beverley and the defense experts, dissecting every detail of her actions and mental state. They challenged inconsistencies and pushed for accountability. The defense sought to humanize her, asking the jury to consider the pressures and psychological struggles she faced. The jury's struggle, weighing evidence and emotion. Jury members faced an unenviable task, balancing overwhelming evidence against complex psychological arguments. Interviews with jurors after the trial revealed the internal conflict and emotional toll the case took on them. Some felt deep sympathy for Beverley's mental health struggles. Others were resolute in their belief that justice demanded conviction. Verdict and sentencing. Justice delivered when the verdict was announced. The courtroom held its breath. Beverley Allitt was found guilty on multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. The judge described her actions as a profound breach of trust that shook the very foundations of healthcare. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation that she remain in high-security psychiatric care. Public reaction, shock, relief, and unanswered questions. The verdict sparked a wave of public reaction. Many expressed relief that justice had been served. Others questioned how such a tragedy could have happened in a hospital, a place of healing. Some advocated for reforms in healthcare, oversight and mental health support for medical staff. The legacy of the trial, lessons and lingering fear. The trial left a lasting imprint on the public consciousness. It forced society to confront uncomfortable questions about trust, power, and vulnerability within healthcare systems. For families and survivors, it was a bittersweet conclusion. Justice achieved, but loss and trauma eternal. Reflection. The thin line between care and harmless. I delved into the trial. I was struck by a haunting truth. The thin line that separates healing hands from harming ones. Beverley Allitt crossed that line with chilling calm. Her story is a stark reminder of how power, when twisted by darkness, can destroy lives from within. The courtroom's echoes had barely faded when the real work began. Beverley Allitt's case wasn't just a legal battle. It was a seismic shockwave that rippled through hospitals, nursing schools, and healthcare systems across the UK and beyond. It forced the medical world to look inward, confronting painful truths about trust, oversight, and the vulnerabilities that can lead to catastrophe. Immediate responses, emergency policy reforms within weeks of the verdict. NHS officials convened emergency panels. Hospitals nationwide scrambled to review patient safety protocols, staff training, reporting systems. Some of the key reforms included stricter medication administration protocols. Double-check systems became mandatory, reducing the chance for errors or malicious acts. Enhanced staff supervision. Nurses and junior staff were more closely monitored, especially during night shifts. Anonymous reporting hotlines, encouraging employees to report suspicious behavior without fear of retaliation. These changes were both welcomed and criticized. Welcomed by those who saw them as vital safety nets, criticized by others who worried about creating a culture of mistrust and surveillance. The psychological fallout among healthcare workers. The case shattered the comforting illusion that hospitals are safe havens for many nurses and doctors. The revelation that one of their own had become a killer was deeply unsettling. Interviews with hospital staff from that era revealed feelings of guilt, paranoia, and exhaustion. One nurse confided, "We questioned everyone, every action. Were we missing signs? Were we trusting the wrong people?" Training in mental health awareness. Nursing schools revamped curricula to include stronger emphasis on mental health awareness, stress management, and recognizing warning signs of emotional distress among colleagues. Programs for psychological support were expanded, though stigma remained a barrier. The tragedy underscored how the pressures of healthcare could push vulnerable individuals toward dangerous behaviors if left unchecked. Legal and ethical debates. Beverley's trial and conviction sparked fierce debates about mental illness and criminal responsibility in healthcare. Should a nurse with severe psychological issues be punished or treated? How can systems balance empathy with accountability? Legal scholars, ethicists, and medical professionals debated endlessly. Some argued for stronger mental health screening for medical staff. Others warned against discrimination and oversimplification. The impact on patient trust, perhaps the hardest hit, was the public's trust. Families became more anxious about hospital stays. Patient advocacy groups gained momentum, demanding transparency and stricter safeguards. Hospitals launched campaigns to rebuild confidence. But the shadow of Beverley Allitt lingered. Media's role in the aftermath. The media, which had sensationalized the trial, now faced criticism for fueling fear and stigma around nursing professionals. Some outlets began highlighting stories of heroic nurses and reforms to balance the narrative. Continuing influence on popular culture. Beverley's story entered the public psyche through books, documentaries, and even fictional portrayals. The angel of death trope became a dark shorthand for medical killers while raising awareness. It also risked unfairly tarnishing the reputation of countless dedicated healthcare workers. The ongoing debate. Vigilance without paranoia. Today, Beverley Allitt's case serves as both a warning and a lesson. Healthcare systems strive for vigilance, but must avoid turning workplaces into zones of suspicion. Balancing safety, mental health support, and trust remains an ongoing challenge. Personal reflections as I piece together this chapter of her story. I was struck by how a single individual's actions can ripple outward, forcing entire systems to change. The victims and families paid the highest price, but the medical community also bore a heavy burden, a reckoning that still echoes today. After the trial and sentencing, Beverley Allitt was transferred to Rampton Secure Hospital, one of the UK's most notorious high-security psychiatric facilities. Too many. This was the end of the line, a place where dangerous minds are locked away, silenced, and hidden from the world. But what did life look like for her behind those walls? What did the days, weeks, and years hold in store? Arrival. The first days of confinement when Beverley arrived at Rampton. She was subjected to intense evaluation and observation. The staff observed her movements, interactions, and moods, cataloging everything in detailed reports. Her arrival was met with a mixture of curiosity and caution to the staff. She was a high-profile case, a nurse turned killer, locked in an environment designed to contain both mind and body. The routine, structured days in isolation and interaction days at Rampton were highly regimented. Mornings began with physical health checks, blood pressure, medication schedules, and mental state assessments. Meals were served in communal dining areas, though interactions were often limited and tense. Therapy sessions, both individual and group, were scheduled regularly for Beverley. Much of her time was spent navigating the tension between enforced socialization and enforced isolation. Psychological treatments, attempts to understand and help. Rampton's psychiatric team employed a variety of treatment modalities. Beverley underwent cognitive behavioral therapy, medication management, and psychoanalytic sessions. The goal was to reduce dangerous impulses, increase insight, and address underlying disorders. But progress was uneven. Some reports noted moments of clarity. Others described withdrawal and silence. Interactions with staff and patients. A complex social web staff described Beverley as both enigmatic and manipulative. She sometimes displayed charm and cooperation. Other times, she was silent or confrontational. Relationships with other patients were fraught. Some feared her. Others were wary of her intellect and unpredictability. The social dynamics inside a facility like Rampton are delicate. Trust is scarce, and every interaction is a careful negotiation. The diaries and secret communications, as revealed earlier. Beverley kept diaries during her confinement. Though heavily monitored, some writings slipped through, revealing chilling insights into her mind. She also maintained secret communications with a few trusted staff members and outsiders, fueling speculation about her influence beyond the hospital. Security measures. The constant watch. Rampton operates under strict security, cameras, locked doors, and controlled movement to find life there. For someone like Beverley, police measures are both protection and punishment. The loss of freedom is absolute. Psychological. Profile updates. A shifting mind over the year's psychiatric evaluations showed changes, some positive, others disturbing. She sometimes expressed remorse, other times unsettling detachment. One report from 2002 stated, subject exhibits persistent compartmentalization of empathy. Emotional responses remain superficial and context-dependent. Its clinical language barely captures the haunting emotional void behind it. Occasional public attention, though hidden. Beverley's case occasionally re-entered public discourse, especially when new information leaked or related crimes surfaced. Each time, the hospital reinforced its commitment to secure containment and rehabilitation. Reflections on confinement living in Rampton is a paradox. It's a place for healing that is also a prison. For Beverley, it means eternal separation from the world she once inhabited, but it also means living daily with the consequences of her actions, a life defined by silence, observation, and control. Closing thoughts. The end of the line. As I researched this chapter, I felt the weight of those walls, not just the physical bricks and bars, but the invisible ones. Isolation, regret, control. Beverley Allitt's life inside Rampton is a stark reminder that some horrors don't end with conviction. They linger, trapped behind walls no one sees, in rooms filled with silence. The story of Beverley Allitt does not end with the cold clank of prison gates or the silent halls of Rampton Secure Hospital. It echoes far beyond, rippling through the lives of families forever changed, the medical community forever wary, and society forever altered in its understanding of trust, vulnerability, and the fragility of human compassion. Her legacy is a haunting reminder that evil can wear the most benign faces, a gentle nurse's uniform, concealing darkness so profound it shattered innocence and exposed the terrifying potential for harm when power and vulnerability intersect, without checks or balances. The victims, many lost before their lives truly began, are more than statistics. They are silent voices whose memories demand that we remember not just the horror, but also the humanity stolen from them and the urgent need to protect the most vulnerable among us. Families who lived through unimaginable grief continue to wrestle with their pain, yet their courage fuels ongoing efforts to reform hospital policies, improve mental health support for medical staff, and promote transparency that can prevent future tragedies. The medical world, scarred but wiser, wrestles with the delicate balance of vigilance and trust, recognizing that safeguarding patients requires more than protocols. It requires empathy, education, and a culture that encourages speaking out without fear. Meanwhile, the public's trust in healthcare, shaken but resilient, underscores the profound responsibility borne by caregivers and institutions alike. Media portrayals, once sensational and simplistic, are now more nuanced, striving to honor victims and avoid glamorizing killers, aware that words carry immense power in shaping perception and memory. Ultimately, Beverley Allitt's dark chapter is a stark call to action, to recognize warning signs early, to challenge complacency, to support those who care, and to remember that behind every tragic headline lies real lives, real families, and real lessons we must never forget. As the years pass, her story remains a cautionary tale woven into the fabric of medical history. It's a chilling testament to what happens when silence is mistaken for safety, and how, in breaking that silence, we honor those lost by forging a future where such horrors can no longer find a home.